Well, I'm on here to concede a point. I was talking about my ethical system on the Richard Dawkins forums, and I'll link to that discussion. And I'm here to officially concede a point that my ethical system is a form of utilitarianism. It's not kind of like utilitarianism, it is a utilitarian philosophy. It's a utilitarian philosophy which defines greatest good and greatest number through the lens of virtue. After examining it, I clearly saw that the system was more about how you decide which actions are for the greatest good, rather than how you decide which actions are, or rather, what is virtuous is decided based on the individual. And that may seem dangerous, but I posit that the individual, that most people have an inborn sense of morality. I've mentioned that before. Most evolutionary biologists will tell you that. We can observe other animals that have inborn sense of morality. It's a useful evolutionary adaptation. So most people do have an inborn drive toward morality. So even though I leave it up to the individual to decide their virtues, that's sort of a mitigating factor. The fact that they have to consider their virtues to begin with is a mitigating factor. It doesn't leave the individual to just decide on a whim. You clearly have to come up with your idea of what are virtues first and foremost. Now, it is a flexible system, and that is both a weakness and a strength. The weakness is that if a corrupt individual gets a hold of it, they could come up with a system which could justify genocide or other horrible atrocities. The good thing is that would require very, very skewed virtues that no reasonable individual would look at that system of virtues and say, oh yes, I agree that the inherent superiority of, say, the Aryan race is a virtue, is a virtuous thing to consider. So it is open to abuse like any ethical system, but that's certainly a mitigating factor, that you have to consider all the virtues ahead of time, rather than just coming up with virtues or coming up with justifications on the fly. You clearly have to consider ahead of time what you consider to be ethical, what you consider to be virtues, and then based on those virtues in the context of a given situation, you decide your actions. So it's not quite as dangerous as some extreme forms of consequentialism, but it certainly does require that you consider the consequences of your actions. So certainly it could be said to be a utilitarian philosophy. Rather than the sliding scale ethical system, maybe it should be called virtue utilitarianism. So I do concede that point. I was slightly wrong in my initial considerations of it, but I still stand by the fact that I think it could be a useful system. Of course, it needs more fleshing out, and I probably need to get rid of some certain vague notions. But I think a good thing is if people adopted this system, it would require us all to get into debate and discussion about what we consider virtues. The system itself doesn't tell you what is a virtuous thing and what is a non-virtuous thing, but it does require that you consider it. And if enough people start considering virtues, we might get into a discussion about virtue, and that could only, in my opinion, that could only lead to better virtues. That could only lead to good. if people did get into a discussion about that. So anyway, I was wrong. I'm not above admitting I'm wrong, so I was wrong.